we go. Okay,
Cool.
so, and this is our Happy Melly seminar with Luke Fisher, CEO of Thanksbox. Welcome, Luke.
Hello.
And let's start. So maybe, Luke, you can tell a little bit about yourself or about company Thanksbox, and then we can just chat about whatever.
Yeah, sure. So I started Thanksbox a few years ago, and Thanksbox, I guess I'll tell you the story first. So I was working at WellPay. We worked on quite a lot of consumer analytics tools, providing marketing directors with insights about how consumers were interacting with them, and we looked at how we could use those insights to influence the way in which they work with us, or ultimately the products and services they might buy from us. And then I went on to run teams and realized that there was a lot of learnings that could be taken from the world of marketing into the world of people, or inside the organization rather than focused externally, and decided to apply a lot of what I'd learned in terms of digital tech and data analytics to the world of work. And that's kind of how we were born. And then we started off with an employee recognition tool. We then did some really smart stuff with the way in which we allocated reward and the way in which we used the tech to collect insights around the way in which employees were behaving. That was recently recognized by the CIPD. I don't know if you guys know the CIPD, because they're a UK-based organization. You familiar? No? Okay, cool.
Not
So it's
really.
like the people for the people forum for the UK. They commission all of the qualifications for people going through HR qualifications, yeah, they're a pretty well-established, well-known organisation in the UK. So they wrote a case study about our work on people analytics to support cultural transformation. That was really cool. And then we added a number of other areas to the product. One was an ideas tool, so people could post their great ideas and suggestions. Their colleagues could then vote on them, and then a decision would be made and communicated to the teams. So a great way of sourcing feedback and ideas for innovation. And then we've added a surveys component as well. But the main themes across the platform are kind of enabling people to have their say, regardless of their level in the organization, about the things that really matter to them. And then using those conversations to create insight and understanding into the way in which people are behaving and living your company values. That's us.
Brilliant.
I should probably add, we're a pretty small team based here in London, and I don't know how strong the Happy Melly presence is still in London, but I met Jürgen a few years ago. Yeah, love the Happy Melly network.
Yeah, but based on what I know, the presence is quite strong in London.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So, I mean, I'm based in Prague, right? In Czech Republic.
Yeah.
I'm probably the only member. So, or maybe there is one more lady. I'm not sure about that.
I should be meeting more people from Happy Melly in London. If nothing else from this conversation, I'd like more people from London to get in touch.
Okay. Anyway, Jürgen, do you have any questions? Just to start.
Yeah, so maybe do you offer those tools in a commercial way, or how do you manage your business?
Yeah, so we do have commercial interest. We tend to bill based on the number of users on the platform, although we're still young enough sometimes to be pretty creative with the pricing. But it is certainly, the intent is to be paid for the tech.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, because I have tried different ways, but to have all the data stored in some way and use those analytics to try to motivate people is great. But I haven't found a tool like that.
Yeah, so I can share my screen and give you guys an example, if you like, of the kind of things that we're providing access to in terms of insights. So if you can, let me know if you can see my screen now. So hopefully you can see it. So this is just an example. You can see it okay, guys?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So essentially of the recognition that's happening on the platform, we then capture the behaviors that people are recognizing for, and then can start to provide information like this. So what this is showing on the inside is the values that employees are recognizing, and on the outer circle, the behaviors that people are recognizing most frequently. Does that make sense?
Yep,
So if you're managing a kind of large scale cultural change project for an organization that's fairly large, sometimes it's difficult to know how your values are really lived across the organization. And this is quite a tangible way to do that and start to build understanding of different either departmental groups or teams, or different demographic profiles, or even different performance ratings. So you could look at performance systems and how that compares to types of values and behaviors people are regularly demonstrating. That was just an example.
Yep. I mean, I really like it, and I mean, I played with it, and I was in touch with some of your sales guys for using it for our purposes. Unfortunately, then our company decided to roll out a global solution, which is not nearly as good because it lacks all lead analytics. So what we have now is basically you can reward people, but we actually cannot see like what are people rewarded for, whether the values actually are there or whether just people are sending money or something. So I really like that. How do you think can these things actually help in that transition? I mean, if you're basically changing company and you want to promote some values, obviously this can help that you can send reward for the people who live those values. But can you do something else? I know that you have some different modules there that can do different things.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that recognition at its core is I observe a behavior that you demonstrate and I positively reinforce it. So there's no better way to know that your values are being lived by your colleagues observing those behaviors and telling people good job. That's the way in which we want people to behave here in this organization. But we also have things like an ideas module. So people can post ideas in which they think will contribute to the success of the company or is a better way in which they can live their values. So that's one example. Or another is that people could ask challenges for suggestions in how people could live more frequently the values. So there's lots of different options. And I think how does it actually help? You know, the tech is part of the story, and it's one in which it can provide you with insight and can enable you to do the things that you need to, but it certainly doesn't do everything, which is often the leadership behaviors and the way in which the leadership teams help the rest of the organization to change. Ultimately, the kind of leadership team is to lubricate the wheels so that the operation can move faster and can change in the direction and in a way that it needs to.
Yeah, because that's something I see very often, that leadership would implement such a tool to promote values, but they wouldn't live them themselves, right? Which I think then makes the tool kind of useless. Because I think if the values, I would actually be interested in your opinion on that, because I think you have also experience with organizational change. Because for me, any organizational change starts with the change in the leadership. If the leadership is not willing to support that change and that new way of working, I think all these initiatives are basically doomed.
So I think the big thing with organizational change is, most consultants that you listen to now, like, change is the new constant. Like, everything is changing all of the time, right? So I think it's one of priorities, and I think it's an order of preference as to which changes the leadership teams actually want to back. Culture tends to be one in which they do understand. It sits on most strategic plans. You have your kind of vision, mission, and your values there. So leadership teams understand this, less so than something like employee engagement, which is a relatively new term. Most certainly not terms like employee experience that people are now, it's a bit of a hype term, but the essence is really nice, that you think about the experience in which employees have with you and actively manage them. So a lot of these programs of work just come down to priority. And if a company is
Mm.
performing really, really well, then they tend to create more capacity for people to think about these things. When companies are performing less well and they're trying to cut costs, then they try and spread people as thinly as possible. And that's when some of these things don't get quite the focus in which they deserve. So I think it's one of priority. And if the priorities are right and are clear, then the leadership team just need to back things and get things done, right? Which means executing well rather than saying and not doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I was in my previous job. I was working for a large bank, and I was there for 4 years. And over those 4 years, I think the leadership announced 4 times an organizational change. And
Yeah.
by the third time, they did it because the two first attempts ended really badly, uh, because they did nothing to actually fuel the change with. So by the third attempt, everybody was so demotivated or so resigned, I would say, that people are just saying, yeah, that's just another of those initiatives. Nothing's going to happen anyway. And the funny thing was that the management changed in the meantime, but this sort of feeling of resignation kind of transferred to the new management. And I think the new
Yeah.
management actually meant well, but it didn't help them because there was this sentiment for such a long time that it really didn't work out.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm
for me,
still
what you're
curious about, can you do something with that?
so what I think it is at that stage a trust flaw that people have volunteered opinion
Mm-hmm.
and thoughts in the past, but nothing saw no action.
Mm-hmm.
Which basically means there was this say-do gap that emerged. So the difference between saying something and doing something. And consequently, when you don't do the things that you've said that you will do a number of times, people start to trust you less.
Yep.
One of my favorite books is The Five Dysfunctions of a Team.
Mm-hmm.
And the first tier to that is, building trust and in your relationships. And I think that's probably what you experience. I also think that people announce things as a change program when actually what's happened most of the time is that it's a refocusing of their goals. And it means that you need to do things differently to deliver those goals, not that you need to change for change's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want to change that often, right? Because it means that there's a level of effort to change. Whereas a lot of the time you're just changing direction or refocusing energy onto different things. But people perceive change to be painful and therefore resist. Whereas often change is a really positive thing for you and for the organization. So I think what you've experienced in the past was probably a trust flaw or issue that people weren't believing that things were going to change.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. The other thing I've observed is that people usually resist when the change is big or huge and they fear it's going to change everything. But when you kind of crumble it into small pieces, they're able to swallow the small pieces. Or at least that's what usually
Yeah,
works for me. If you do it in small steps, it usually works out. If you try to do it in one huge chunk, it usually fails.
yeah. It's like it's like saying run a marathon tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't run, it feels impossible, right? But if you say train for 4 months and every week run an extra mile, and before you know it, you're running 10 kilometers, and then you're running, a half marathon, and then you're running a marathon before you know it. You know, it's the same concept that saying go from 0 to 100 is really tough.
Yeah, I assume that going from 0 to 100, you have to pass 20, 40, 60, and 80 on your way.
Exactly. And I think that often is the leadership teams have big ambitions of what the outcome is, and rightly so. Like you should have, these big scary goals that feel near impossible, but when you achieve them, they're the biggest celebration. But the task is for the leadership team to lead people through that process and pave the way so that they know what's coming 1 or 2 or even 3 steps ahead. And I think knowing and having clarity of that path makes these bite-sized chunks much, much easier for people to swallow. And before they know it, they've gone through wholesale change. They are completely different people individually, and the organization's in a fundamentally different place. But you don't really know it until you take time to stop and reflect. which is partly why, we created a recognition company to celebrate the successes that you actually go through when you're changing, because businesses have to change, otherwise they hit an inflection point and die. But going through that change means that sometimes, when you're going from 0 to 100, 0 to 20 is a big gap. And if you don't start celebrating success, or at least reflecting on what you've done when you've got to 20, people just burn out quite quickly. So I think it's about knowing where you are, resetting, and then creating that next kind of short-term objective.
Yep, I totally agree. And I agree that it's about creating those or celebrating those small successes, because it could be too big for people to focus in the long term if they don't know they are on the right track. Jorge, anything from you? Any questions, comments?
I will be interested on hearing what happens when you identify that one of the values is not followed or lived by the employees.
So I guess from our perspective, like, it's as simple as raising that with the organization who it matters to most, which is our customer. From there, though, the way in which they decide to intervene can vary. So it could be that they leverage the platform and challenge people to think why the specific value is not being lived, and to come up with ideas of what that would look like. It may be that the awareness just isn't there and people don't understand. If you look at any kind of engagement ladder, starting with awareness is probably your first step, right? But then next, once you've started to build awareness and you go through to the likes of understanding, people really know what it means. And then could they spot it in others? And I guess that's your big challenge. Is values have some level of abstraction that are difficult really to pin down immediately. Like, values tend to inform the choices in which you make, and those choices inform your actions, and your actions inform the way in which you behave. So there's quite a big gap between those things. And I think knowing that that's happening can sometimes be quite difficult. But once you've validated that it's not happening, your intervention steps could be as simple as communication to raise awareness. It could be workshops. It could be gathering stories. We've learned to understand stories for lifetimes. So using those and leveraging those when there's really good model examples of when a value's been lived and why it's important to the business, I think is fundamentally important. But I think the other consideration is that, so I have a pretty strong feeling around brand and why values are important. And so if you think of brand as a coin and two sides of that coin, one is external and one is internal. The way in which the brand represents itself to the world, it's easier probably for consumer businesses, is through the expectations that it sets as to when you engage with that brand or experience it in some way, shape or form. And that typically is the brand values, what the brand's about. And the kind of manifestation of those values internally is what the culture becomes, because you're guiding principles, your fundamental principles of those values, which flows then into your experience and so on that you have with that organization. But the same is true on the customer side. So brand values flow into the experiences that we create for our customers. And you could, pretty easily ask yourself that question. If we wanted to be perceived as innovative, for example, externally to the market or internally, if our customers, when we did a research survey, said they don't perceive us as innovative, then what intervention steps would you take? You'd probably tell them how you are innovative, involve them in some of the discussions to show them how you're innovative. The same is true on the employee side. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I have also seen a lot of frustration trying to promote values. So, for instance, I have seen HR areas trying to organize a lot of events or activities to promote the values. However, when people is forced to be in those activities, there is a lot of resistance. So.
Well, I think so some of this is met by the fact that some values are created in a boardroom with no involvement or representation for what the culture actually is. If you're 1,000 people or 10,000, 100,000 people, each individual has a set of values that are important to them and that connect. The reason we buy from different brands is because the things that attract me to certain brands may be different to the things that attract you to certain brands. And those values are a representation of that. And the same is true as an employee. If I don't connect with the values, but I'm being told that these values need to be instilled in me and I need to behave in a certain way, if I don't conform, I'll leave, you know? So I think that's part of the problem, is when there's a lack of involvement from the people to help design the values, it becomes a real problem, because people create almost an immediate disconnect when you can run, you know, a fabulous event with hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on it to say you need to be, I don't know, let's say evil is one of your values, just to exaggerate this example. Then most normal people, nice people like us, hopefully, would turn around and say, I don't want to be evil. But if that's what you're being told, no matter how much has been spent on the event, you don't want to be aligned to those values, and that creates the problem. And then if you dilute that some way with, you know, a value that might be supportive or helpful, does everybody want to be supportive or helpful? Naturally, yes, if your environment is right. But if you're in a position where that isn't socially accepted, then you have a disconnect between what the senior team are designing the values to be in a boardroom versus what people feel are likely to connect on the kind of shop floor, if you like.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of money is invested on those strategies that in the end doesn't work. So
yes, so we've got a great example. We've worked with a company that's across like 50 different locations globally, has over 1,000 people, and we invited all of them to describe what makes a great day and what asked them to describe what makes a bad day with the organization that they work for. And we use those words to create association to themes of what people were telling us was the environmental factors that they wanted to work with, if that makes sense. And then from there, we use those themes to capture stories that brought essentially what were emerging as their values to life. And then those stories essentially then informed the values and where they settled. And the leadership team then agreed that these values that their people have told them about, we had really high participation levels of people volunteering this information. The leadership team then kept with the values as described by the people, because that's the environment in which they want to work in. So if you do it that way around, from the bottom up rather than from the top down, you know, people are naturally vested when they've been involved in a process rather than being told what to do. Hopefully that helps in some way.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
So
all right.
Talking about values some more, what would be your thoughts on, like, if you have a huge company?
Yeah.
Can there be slightly different sets of values in the departments, or do you think it has to trickle down from the top?
I think if you believe the concept that the values at its real core is the representation of what the brand represents, then I think you should be able to get to a core set of values in which the interpretation, so this question very similar, so either an organization thinks of itself in regional structures, countries maybe, or functional structures, okay? What actually happens in practice in a large company is that those functional structures have to collaborate with other parts of that functional structure, which means you operate across the organization. So I think it would be difficult if there wasn't a core connector right in the center of what the brand is about, that you would be able to then link either some behavioral interpretation to what those values mean in the context of your area, or to develop those out slightly within your respective business unit, for example. I'm all for business areas having an identity, but I think it's important for them to understand what the common interest is across the organization. This one comes up quite a lot. I get asked this question quite a lot, you know, can you have core values and then a departmental set of values? And I think that if the core values have been designed from the top down, then often that's where that disconnect is emerging, is that people believe in different things to what the representation of the people believe in.
Yeah, and that was precisely the case I was referring to, where you have that top-down set of values, and then from the bottom up in the departments, slightly different values emerge. So I've been thinking whether they are more like interpretations of those same values, but sometimes they aren't. And from what I've observed from several corporations, I think it causes some dysfunctionalities, because then like these separate groups value something else and they cannot work together very well.
Yeah, I kind of understand that, but that's also, I definitely understand your point. I do think that working with each other is different to, it's almost like saying, if we replaced values with purpose, for example, in the organization, would you disagree with your purpose? There has to be some core existence or rationale to why you're all in the same place in the same organization. Disagreeing over standards, maybe that's a different story. Or disagreeing over ways of working or processes or whatever it might be, I completely understand. But kind of at a core values level, there should be consistencies, which is why you've created emotional attachment to the brand that you work for.
Okay, thanks for confirming my hypothesis.
No, that's cool. I've probably only got time for one more question, though, if that's okay.
Okay.
Or one final thought, if that's all right with you guys.
Yeah, sure. Jorge, anything from you? Last chance.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. So what? How can we, as a change agents, can influence those kind of behaviors on the executive teams? Because we can agree that, but how to convince an executive team to use a tool like that?
I guess there's convincing people to use a tool like ours, and then I think the real opportunity for you as change agents is to act as a catalyst to that process. In my mind, the job to be done of a change agent is to make that team more effective, which probably means spend time with the person coordinating or managing that team, to make sure that there's more of the right behaviors being demonstrated by them, and that they actively encourage or involve people to demonstrate more of the desired behaviors within their environment. And if the thing that you do to be successful is help them to do that quicker, easier, whatever it might be, then I would say that's where you're adding your value. You can, if you seek to replace the manager doing it badly and do it better, it won't be sustainable change. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, so Luke, Jorge, thank you both very much for attending this seminar. The recording will be available in a few days, I guess. So, guys, once again, thank you very much. Have a great evening and see you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.